Thanks very much. Thanks, Kevin. Yes, my name is Deirdre Kinahan, and I wrote a play, an old song, Half Forgotten, for one of Ireland's most revered and celebrated actors, Bryan Murray. And the reason I wrote it was that Bryan rang me one night about 18 months ago to say that he had to drop out of a production, These Halcyon Days, where he was playing the role of Sean, because he'd been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And he was absolutely devastated and at such a loss as to know what the effect of this diagnosis was going to have both on his life and his career. And I remember getting this sense, you know, here's a man who's been 50 years on stage, 50 years on film and television, and now it looks like it's all going to be taken away from him. And he was saying, like, I'll never be in front of an audience again. And I just thought, well, who says you'll never be in front of an audience again? You know, because his mastery, his ability to hold an audience in the palm of his hand, to create a role, to imagine a place, was still really vibrant and really there. It was just his short-term memory that was immediately affected. So thus began a journey, quite a journey, where I collaborated with a brilliant production company, Soft Productions, and with the Abbey Theatre, and with some amazing creatives like Matthew Malone, Louise Lowe, a suite of designers. And together we built a play that could be performed by Bryan or by any actor with Alzheimer's, and a play that was not in any way compromised but embraced all the challenges of the ailment. So initially, as a playwright, trying to think how I would do this, I thought I would write a play that kind of sang to the tune of Bryan's voice. Bryan being an actor, I thought I would mirror that life in some way. So I created a character called James O'Brien. James O'Brien is in a nursing home. James O'Brien is listening to a string quartet. He's listening to a beautiful piece of music, because music is so important to all of us when it comes to memory. And I thought, James is trying to rebuild his life. He's trying to write it all down. He's at the early stages of Alzheimer's, and he wants to create something that will remind him of who he is when he reaches the latter stages of dementia. And so the play begins with an older man in a nursing home listening to a piece of music that gives him a memory of being a child, a 7-year-old child jumping into the river from in Dublin, where he came from. But I thought, I don't want to leave the actor with a book just reading to the audience. That's not going to be theatrical or invigorating either for him or the audience. So I conceived of having another character who is James's younger self, who is the vibrant, dynamic part of him that still exists. And that younger self can help the older actor rebuild his memories, rebuild the scenes from his life. In the art of the play, he plays a load of the characters from James's life, but also in a practical way, the younger actor was able to help move Bryan through the production, because naturally he wouldn't necessarily remember whether there was a shift in a scene. So together the whole creative team kind of found and created these methods and ways of making theatre possible, even with the challenge of Alzheimer's. So what we're going to do is we're going to read 2 extracts from the play for you this evening. The first extract is the very top of the play, so it'll give you an idea about how the story swings in and how the whole structure worked. And then we'll have a little break and I will introduce the second extract just to give you an idea of what it is you're going to hear. So Matthew who played younger James, is going to read younger James, and Jonathan has kindly stepped in, Jonathan White, and he's going to read older James. And I'm just going to read the stage directions just to give you an idea about how the whole thing worked. So thanks very much. We are in the day room of a nursing home. There are musicians playing a vigorous classical piece of music. A dapper man, James O'Brien in his 70s, sits listening appreciatively. A younger man sits by his side, also listening appreciatively. The music ends. James stands.
Bravo! Bravo!
Toy.
Wonderful, beautiful,
Mesmeric.
good word, lovely word.
It's the river, isn't it? It's the Liffey. I was born on it, you know, bred on it.
I wrote it, I write it, you see. I write it all down.
What are the memories I just cannot live without?
That is how I started.
Writes it, holds it.
Ma's hands,
My ma's hands.
Ma's hands. Sarah's eyes, Emmet Road, Danny. It's all here, written here.
Danny Murray, River Liffey, ma's hands. River Liffey.
On that sunny day with Waxer and Danny, when I take my boy courage into my hands and jump crazily, crookedly off Island Bridge and into the depths of the River Liffey when I was, what?
7.
That was the day, my day, the day I find out I can do anything, because I am expressly forbidden from playing on Island Bridge. And I am expressly forbidden from hanging around with Danny Murray. And I can tell you, I am expressly forbidden from jumping into the river, any river, let alone the River Liffey.
Jesus, Mary and Joseph.
Jesus, Mary, and Holy Sweet Saint Joseph.
What do you think you're doing? Dear God, dear Jesus, you could get diphtheria off that bloody Liffey, typhoid, dysentery, pneumonia.
It's summer, Ma.
Don't give me cheek, you little get, coming in here dripping, coming in here like a drowned rat when I told you, expressly told you not to be going near that river. Who are you with? Sure, I don't need to ask. I don't need to ask.
Do I? No, she didn't need to ask. Danny Murray.
Danny Murray, my best friend, the best friend any boy anywhere could ever hope to call his friend.
Danny Murray lives in the small row of cottages in the alley.
The alley. The alley, the alley, the alley.
White cottages they are, with 2 families living in each. One on the top floor and one on the bottom floor. My ma seems to think it is some kind of affliction to live in the alley, some great shame or curse that might follow you up and out from your breakfast and sit like a threat, a warning on your chest.
This fella is bad. This fella is no good. This fella comes from the alley.
But I think it's a great place altogether. Teeming it is.
The music of the alley comes in.
That's it. That's it. The alley.
The alley. Always pumping out a smell of potatoes and tobacco and sweat and grease. Because most of the dads work up with the trains in Inchicore or up making beer at Guinness's and are forever tapping when they're home on tin pans or old boots or some class of a furnishing, fixing, threading, heaving, hammering. Particularly on a sunny day. And it is a sunny day. The day I leap with Danny Murray into the depths of Dublin, the depths of Dublin's glorious, filthy, rushing river.
The musicians play more of the Liffey music. The 2 Jameses listen. Young James gives older James his notebook and points to the text.
There are always gangs ringing around the alley.
There are always gangs ringing around the alley. Mothers yapping over the half doors or walking collectively off over the bridge in their best headscarves to get the bus into town to do their shopping on Thomas Street, Francis Street, Meath Street, Camden, and children. Children everywhere. Children hanging out of the windows, children streeling over the cobble.
Children skipping, jumping, laughing, screaming, pelting 2 handballs against the wall of a cottage or kicking a rag ball in an effort at soccer.
Every cottage in the alley seems to grow children, then fling them out in a rake of sizes, snot and wild laughter.
Then fling them out in a rake of sizes, snot and wild laughter.
It's a different world to where I live. A different world to Emmet Road, yet just around the corner.
Emmet Road. Big house. One of the big houses, just at the back of Kilmainham Jail. It was my grandmother's house. And Ma always said that my grandmother was haunted by the volley of shots that rang out when Ireland's patriots were being murdered there by the British in 1916.
She did. She always said that.
And Ma always said that Granny used to kneel by her bed, hands over her ears, just trying to think of lovely things.
Lovely things, Granny. Think of lovely things.
Because she was only a little girl back then, but all she could see in her mind's eye was blood splattering onto the back walls of the jail, and blood running up through our floorboards, seeping into her little girl world with the terror of it all. And Ma said that she never got over it, because if anything ever upset Granny, she would just close her eyes, drop to the floor, and put her hands over her ears. Traumatized. That's what my Ma said.
Traumatized.
Lived on her nerves like Ma.
The musicians play, the two Jameses listen.
Emmet Road. Emmet Road.
It is an odd kind of a house. Our house, downstairs, upstairs.
Upstairs, downstairs.
But Ma was fierce proud of it and always kept it spotless, with a big arrangement of flowers sitting inside the stained glass of the front door.
Front door. Front door. Big blue front door. I can remember. I can remember way back. I can remember the alley. I can remember Danny. But yesterday, no. Yesterday is all a fog. Yesterday is empty. Yesterday's gone.
I am your yesterday. I am my yesterday when we write it all down.
Write it. Keep it. Keep my life.
My life.
And that's the end of the first extract there. Thanks very much. Thank you. So you can see how the memories were like jewels kind of going between the younger and the older James, and the younger James is constantly trying to buoy and facilitate and help the older James, relive those memories, find them again, record them, so that he knows who he is, because all those stories and all those people still live at the heart of him. But whilst I really wanted to celebrate the joy and the resilience of the human being dealing with this disease, I also had to be really honest about the nature of the disease and how it affects somebody. And from the very beginning, we wanted this play to work from the inside out. As an audience, you are inside the mind of this fantastic, loving, brilliant man, but you watch it fracture and fade, and sometimes betray him, and then sometimes give him the most beautiful gifts of beautiful memories. So this second extract is a darker extract from the play. It's later on in the play when the older man James is becoming increasingly kind of angry and tired and frustrated by his own inability to rebuild the picture of his wife, the woman he loves and he believes he just cannot live without.
Sarah. My Sarah. If I forget her, I am lost. If I forget her, then I no longer want to be. I simply no longer want to be.
I will write her down. I write it all down.
I'm tired of this. I think I'm tired of this. So bloody tired of it all.
Searching. Searching. Always searching.
Searching. Searching. Always searching.
Trying to
Trying
find.
to find.
Trying to root deep down through the stony grey soil of memory. Digging. Always digging until my head hurts. Until my head pains.
Head.
And turning up what?
Head.
Down
pains.
there in the muck of me,
What?
just muddy pictures or
Muck of
confused moments or empty faces. Empty faces.
Empty face. I cannot lose Sarah.
I'm doing
The importance of being earnest.
that's it.
Who cares? I can't change this. Can't change looking out at a world that no longer makes sense. Can't change trying to trust my mind. My mind!
Trying to trust.
Can't change the anger. Raging
Anger at the inconvenience of others, other people walking in my way, other people walking through my home, other people walking through my life. And faces pale, faces shocked, faces blurring, twisting, melting, becoming unfamiliar, like my world.
Like the streets that I have traversed for decades, gradually moving, gradually shifting, turning different corners onto different streets, and I am lost. Sarah! Where's Sarah? I need her with me. I try to hold, I try to pretend. I look at the face by my side, the face of my wife, my daughter, my friend, and I wonder who they are. Why they are so slow.
So slow to see that I am here, that I am hungry, that I am tired, and then I just cannot find the word to tell them, or I cannot find the key.
The stupid key.
The key to the car, the key to the shed, the key to the door, the key to my life. Because my life, my inside life, my inner life of words and pictures and smells and faces and passions and discoveries and laughter and taste and glorious story fades, fogs, freezes, melts. And I can't find it. I can't find them. I can't find me.
I can't find me. Me!
Sarah. Tweed skirt, satin blouse. Tweed skirt, satin blouse, suede shoes.
I'm not interested.
Eyes lifting as I take my seat. Eyes lifting behind passionate, fashionable reading glasses. Tweed skirt, satin blouse.
It was a two-piece, actually.
It was a two-piece, actually.
Very de rigueur, very Mary Quant. And short. Daringly short. In an emerald green.
Sarah's knees.
Sarah's knees. Squeezed tight in that pencil of emerald green. Emerald green.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I think we've a little one here.
Cool.
So I think there's going to be a little Q&A after that. Thank you very much. Thanks, guys. Well done.
Thank you. I think something we should mention, Deirdre was alluding to, you're probably wondering how we did the play with someone that has Alzheimer's. Something should be mentioned is there was a third actor, part of the company, called Dara Feely, and he was off stage, but he was part of the whole rehearsal process, and he had a microphone and headphones and a live feed of everything we were doing on stage, and then Bryan had a very handy dandy earpiece. So a huge amount of our time was spent rehearsing how best to deliver the lines to Bryan, what clarity he needed, volume, that kind of thing, and then it was quite amazing how much Bryan could relay from that.
Absolutely.
Just in
Yeah.
terms of that's probably it's a missing piece of the puzzle of how we, did a live performance with him each night. It was through technology, I suppose, and time.
Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I'll kick us off, and I'm going to allow everyone else to ask questions. But I really want to know. It feels so personal, and I'd like to know about the process that you undertook in order to research and to produce a work that is just so personal like this.
Yes. Well, it was. I got to know Bryan. I didn't know him as an actor until he did my play Halcyon Days. But I knew him I didn't know him as a person, but I knew him as an actor. I knew him on screen. I knew him on stage. I had grown up watching him command stages. I knew what a brilliant storyteller he was. And once I kind of entered into this kind of crazy idea, I had huge support both from him and from his partner, Una Crawford O'Brien. And really, it was their courage just inspired all of us to keep going, because they passionately believe in art and theatre, and they really love it. And I realised quickly that in order to make this work for Bryan, who was moving into a different phase of Alzheimer's, the best thing to do in terms of the story of the man, at the centre of the play, James, was to get it to link in or reflect Bryan's own story and experience as much as possible. But yet, to be fair to Bryan Murray, the actor, I had to give him a character that he could create and build. So I was kind of always walking two lines. And in the first draft, I actually wrote quite a dramatic story for the character James O'Brien. I had him going off to America and coming back and a lot of broken things in his life. I was treating it as I would a normal play. And then I realised we did a workshop in the summer, not this summer gone, the previous summer, where we did a week and we did some readings and playing with the script, and Matthew was a huge part of that, and some other creatives. And I realised, oh my God, all the drama here is in having a man with Alzheimer's playing the role of a man with Alzheimer's. So I stripped away a lot of the drama of the story and just allowed that extraordinary connection between Matthew and Bryan, younger James, older James, just take over, and the magic of that take over. In terms of research, obviously I was around Bryan a lot and I could see how the disease was impacting on him. Everyone in the team, Matthew has personal experience of Alzheimer's. My own dad is 95, he's heading into dementia. Everybody on the team had some kind of experience of it. But there was something about working in a room with somebody, all those little things you take for granted, but it was so informative as to how we could build a production. And how and building the production happened at the same time as writing the script and kind of doing the research and getting to know what would be needed. But I have to say, when it came to the actual production in the Abbey, you know, people were extraordinary. You know, like the stage management team went in and the whole of the Abbey was reconfigured in order to allow Bryan come into the space every day, recognise the space every day, where he was going to rehearsal. Even little things like all the toilets in the Abbey are now unisex. But for the period that we were rehearsing in there, they went back to being male and female. Because then Bryan would have had a heart attack if I floated out of the cubicle. Do you know what I mean? So, I mean, it's just that kind of detail. There was a team around us thinking of everything. And then when it came to the actual production, I mean, Matthew can talk to this a great deal more, but things like they put photographs of Bryan up on the dressing room so he could see himself in the production. Because every time he arrived at the theatre, he didn't know what he was coming to. So it all kind of went hand in hand. And in terms of personal, I think it became really personal to all of us. I don't think this had ever been done before. And I know somebody from the Alzheimer's Society said, you're breaking ground. And when you break ground, you never really know what's underneath. But actually, we in the arts, that's the kind of live wire energy that we all really kind of dance on. And it brings out the best in us as artists and the best in us as humans. So there was something, somebody described it as theatrical whitewater rafting, which is exactly what it felt like. But it was quite a joyful ride at the same time. And in the end of the day, Bryan Murray got up on the Peacock stage where he started his career, and man, did he hold that audience in the palm of his hand. And so it was a most extraordinary moment for all of us who were involved.
It's amazing. It's an amazing story.
Oh, thanks.
And you're absolutely right. You're breaking new ground. So as someone who'd like to follow in this kind of creative scenario of trying to make people aware of dementia as something which is all over the place, which doesn't mean that people are inherently different or weird, but they just have this thing and we're all dealing with it together, ideally. I'd like to know, what kind of things have you learned? Because you've done this kind of thing, like you've put this out there, you've worked with somebody suffering with the disease, and you've also dealt with audiences and production teams. So what kind of lessons, if you could go back to the you before you actually started the project, is there any advice that you would give and say, watch out for that, or
Yeah, would you have any, because Matthew was
Yeah,
on stage with Bryan all the time,
Yeah.
so,
And in rehearsal as well.
And
So,
in
like,
rehearsal.
In theatre, we rehearse things for between like 4 and 6 weeks before an audience sees them, and we think we had about 5, which was quite a long time for. 5 would be above average for a play of this length. It was about an hour.
Yeah.
If I could go back, I would have given us 8 to 10 weeks.
Okay.
You know, because rehearsal was so different, because you're working with an actor that, you know, I see some people wearing name tags for the spirit of the event. We should all be wearing name tags. That's like one of the things you can do that just makes someone with living this dementia, their life is 10 times easier if you're wearing your name tag and you're comfortable with the fact that, you know, maybe your name isn't going to be retained. So I've known Bryan for 1.5 years, but I introduce myself to him every time I see him.
Okay.
But then the funny thing is over time, you know, he does use his familiarity in different ways, but rehearsal couldn't take place in a traditional way because Bryan couldn't retain the notes that, you know, Jonathan and I rehearsed 2 hours ago and we had notes about what we would do today, and of course that's no problem for Jonathan or I, and you start to realize, I suppose, your cognitive like privilege going on, and so it's just you're kind of throwing out the rule book. And the phrase we kept on coming back to is that we're just building it around Bryan and we're building it around his Alzheimer's. And we worked with someone called Barbara Ann Harkin, who works at IMA, and she's an arts and disability expert, and a phrase that she, which I'm sure is not the first one to say it, but we came back to it a lot, is, you know, you've met someone with dementia, that means you've met one person with dementia. You know, the next person living with dementia is going through that in a different way. Bryan's a very specific person. He's been a successful actor for 40 years. Like, there are very few people in the world that can actually say that. So we were dealing with someone that's like really au fait with being an actor and loves rehearsal and is great with text, but he was never going to be able to retain it, or he wasn't going to be able to retain shape. So we had to build things with him, and then we'd ask Bryan. Bryan would just have a shorter day. Like fatigue is a huge thing, as anyone that knows, anyone that lives with Alzheimer's or dementia, fatigue's massive. So Bryan would kind of leave after the morning, and we'd kind of build something to kind of almost test with him the next day. And he would consent to doing the play every day. He'd consent to going on stage sometimes minutes before. Like we would be actively, like in the wings, I would remind Bryan what we're about to do as the fire announcement was going.
Wow.
That's the level of, because we needed we needed to be responsible to him, and we were very much had a plan in place that if Bryan had said, I really don't want to go on stage, that's exactly what would have happened. There was an understudy in a costume ready to go on.
Okay.
So those are all precautions you wouldn't normally take to that degree, because basically his safety and dignity were kind of they led everything, and it meant, like Deirdre, you were rewriting your play.
yes,
Because we were learning.
We were learning, that's what, you learned so, I mean, you think you thought of everything, you know?
Yeah.
But of course, you know, once you get into that room, and then also, we were asking a lot of Bryan, and he was asking a lot of himself, you know? And it is a progressive disease, and you've good days and you've bad days, you know? So I think we learned a lot once we went into rehearsal. In a way, we were really lucky that this production was served by really some of the best creatives in Ireland, like the best sound designers, the best actors, the best directors, and when I say best, I mean that they're at the height of their careers. They're very comfortable and strong in who they are and what they can bring, and they all went at this project with the same ambition they would have for anything, and then they would shift gear and shift gear and shift gear, and that was something we learned, because you've got a beautiful design of side lights, and then you realise we can't be sure that Bryan is going to ever hit the same spot any night, and it's too much on Matthew to be constantly manoeuvring around, and it'll get away in the text, new lighting design.
Oh.
Do you know what I mean? Like literally, the set swung in a particular way because it was brilliantly designed, and it meant that, you know, the idea of, you know, your world constantly shifting and moving, but then what kept happening was the set and Bryan would just not compute, and so that had to be kind of redesigned halfway through to swing in a different way. And then similarly, kind of 3 weeks into it, we realised that the text, They were always the one person. So the text was there, but it had to be redistributed because it just wasn't working as well as it had in the early part. But you would never in a theatre production find yourself a week before your opening basically rewriting the final third of the play. Never. And you'd never have designers just go, okay, that's no problem with it. Everybody had to be able to do that. But everybody was so comfortable in their own talent and their own role. So I think that was a really important learning to take from it, And I remember, and there was a couple of panicky moments, where you're thinking, oh my God, not about us, but it was always about that it was always to be true to everybody who was going to come along, who have their own personal experience of dementia or Alzheimer's, and what you want to do is elevate. Do you know what I mean? And you want to focus in on the positive and the brilliance of that person, but you also want to be honest.
Yeah.
Do you know? So, the whole process, you never stopped learning. Mm-hmm. Never. And no show was the same. And even when it went on, you were never sure what you were going to get.
Yeah, that was a big difference. Is usually when a show was up, after a week, you're like, we're really finding our groove. But it was actually harder as we went on because Bryan was just, we were managing his fatigue, and that's why having backups and having an understudy, and yes, there were some audiences that felt a little bit disappointed that Bryan didn't go on twice, because he was just too tired. But that was part of the plan. But his understudy was none other than Barry McGovern, who's like one of the most celebrated Irish theatre actors ever. So they were fine. They had a great time.
Yeah.
But a beautiful anecdote to do with that is that Barry and Bryan met each other in the Young Abbey Company, and Bryan started his acting career at 21. He signed a contract on his birthday. He likes to tell the story. He signed an Abbey contract on his 21st birthday, and he and Barry met then. And fast forward nearly 50 years later, and his buddy, who's also a really successful actor, Barry McGovern doesn't understudy for anybody.
No.
But he was very happy to for his friend, because they've been friends for so long, and he would understand more than any actor, the cruelty of losing your ability to act in the way that you're able to.
Yeah.
So that there was just the leading principle was flexibility. Was yes, we know the way things go forward. We know the way buildings are made, and then we have to think about how we build buildings differently if people are using a wheelchair. We have to think differently about how we're going to conduct a rehearsal process if someone has different cognitive abilities. So for me, the most exciting thing was to see how flexible we can be, like as theatre artists. Of course, it came with a lot of stress, and it was experimental, but it did work. And that was quite thrilling, and you kind of then ask yourself, like, what more can we integrate into art, whether that's sickness or ability or any sort of difference, I suppose.
And it was wonderful to see a man come out on stage, curtains open, audience in front of you, with no idea what's coming next. Like, that is the actor's nightmare. That's it, when we have a nightmare, it's, oh my God, I'm in the wrong theatre, I don't know what play I'm in. That's what he was walking into. But then the voice would come in the ear, and that was it. All that artistry, all that 50 years of playing roles and holding stages, it just kicked in. And you could see actors coming and audiences, and you could always feel, the place was packed, it sold out very quickly. But you could feel for the first few minutes, everybody was very stressed and very nervous. Is this going to work, or is it all going to go, belly up? But then they'd just see Bryan come out and Matthew and this ease between them, and you would feel the place relax. And even for actors, they would say, look at that instinct. Because, we all have it in us the same way a footballer or a musician or whatever. But again, it had never been tried before.
What did you find?
Well, Jonathan was an
absolutely
audience.
true. I saw Bryan's early performances at the Peacock as a schoolboy. I've known him for 40 years. At cross swords various times. And to see him play, and that's what it was. That and that could only have happened because of the trust he had instinctively. He knew that there were people around him looking out for him. So when he got his cue, it's showtime.
Yeah.
Amazing. And it really reminds me of Terry Pratchett, actually, because he, if you read the stories and the accounts of his life post diagnosis, there's never really any point where he considers not doing his thing. Like writing is his thing. So he just writes, and he keeps writing, and he's incredibly prolific. Even though he's got this thing bearing down on him, which the stress of it by itself would be enough if it wasn't with all the other things. And it really reminds me of that. Like, Bryan is he's an actor, so that's what he does. Does that sound right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that rang true for us.
That ran
Absolutely.
through from
He never stopped being an actor. His ability to act didn't, like, of course it changed, but like he was basically still an avid actor that was very ready to play a moment. It was the most normal thing in the world for him.
Interestingly, he's now continuing to use this technique in Fair City, using the earpiece. Up till that, he had been they'd been hiding bits of script for him in newspapers and that sort of thing. But once they saw what he could do on stage with an earpiece, that's now the way he works. And he's continuing.
And we just had, just on that, an actor who acts. There was one, you look after each other in a rehearsal room, and you become aware if maybe there's something in the play is impacting somebody personally and upsetting them in some way. So there was a point around that second extract that we read for you that Matthew and Bryan were rehearsing, and Bryan was getting really upset with the, me, and Louise, the director, was just, and I think we'll just call it a day now, and we'll break and we'll have a cup of tea or whatever. And she says, "You all right, Bryan?" And he looks at her and he goes, "I'm acting, darling." So it was hilarious,
Exactly.
Yeah, so and like that's where a lot of it came from, because when we were rehearsing even earlier, Jonathan was saying the me. Where did that come from? And I said, we were doing a workshop and I had the line, I can't find me. But when Bryan read it, he said, I can't find me. So I kind of stole it from him then and put it into the script. So it was all very, it was a real give and take.
I know it's important to also say, we were there at work with Bryan, his partners, Una, Crawford, O'Brien. Una's with Bryan all the time, so Bryan, my sister actually said it after the show. She was like, what's so hard is, Bryan is going to go off now. Bryan still has his Alzheimer's. The show's done now. He's still living with that. And Una was just a huge member of the team, and she was a member of our creative team. And, she was instrumental in making sure there was loads of recordings of our rehearsals and loads of images of our production. And she'd have it rotating on an iPad at home constantly. So we'd constantly have reminders, videos of us doing it that he could watch on the iPad anytime. I visited their home a couple of times. There's loads of very clear signage. She'd be the one saying, "Good morning, you're going to do a play today at the Peacock," and he was like, "Oh, fabulous play!" And that's kind of that's Bryan's dream day. He's like, "The Peacock, great! I love that.
Yeah.
I guess I'll do it." Whereas she's there, honestly, probably working harder than any of us. So it's not to sugarcoat that this was all like easy or that it's easy. It was because everyone's working like the clappers, but probably Una the most.
And we had a full-time Alzheimer's assistant,
Yes.
Sarah, who would bring him in and out on the bus because he loved to get the bus. And, so there was huge resources. And I think there was a team of 52 people worked on this show, which is effectively a one-man show.
Yeah.
A two-hander. They're both playing the one man. And then even Louise, like we had the two actors and the two understudies. And then Dara, who was supposed to be understudying Matthew, ended up becoming the earpiece. So he ended up watching what Bryan would discover in rehearsal and then trying to feed it into his own performance into Bryan's ear. So we had four men all playing the one man.
Yeah.
So at the end of it, I think we were all confused. But it was great crack as well, and it was just extraordinary to see it work and to see it happen night after night. And audiences just took the roof off, really, because all of us are deeply affected by this, and sometimes sometimes you can, I don't know, you can change the outcome in a way you never would have believed possible.
That's very true. I don't want to hog the conversation. There's two. Can I go to Kevin first?
Yes, please.
It's great to be here. I missed it even though I'm chair of the Irish Dementia Working Group. So I know Bryan.
Ah.
And the one thing that has come here is, you were very, very lucky. Is Bryan was doing what he has a passion for. Because if he didn't have a passion, I've been in local places that were at home in town hall kind of thing. I could not do what Bryan has, and my dementia is totally different. But because Bryan has that passion, he was streets ahead of you in one sense, and he nailed it when you said Bryan is retired, it's time we need to take up a field. Trust me, if Bryan wanted to take tea, he would have said, enough is enough, I want to take tea. And like, I love the way your openness to accept and to try and go along. And just listen to you, maybe there was times, did you feel that in looking back in it, we go to the cup of tea example, that you may have been overprotecting him just ever so slightly? This is his passion, and the day, whichever will come first, his ending or the Alzheimer's taken, that passion will never leave him. You can go to an artist like Glenn Campbell. Glenn Campbell didn't know his own name. He could sing every one of his songs. People who were in nursing homes, and I've said out there, were non-verbal, put on a song that they knew, and they'll sing it. And I can bet you a pound a penny that if one of you will quote a line from the Irish RN, where Bryan was in, you won't have to hunt it. It will come back. It's all there. It's just his jumbled up now. But it comes back to I'm writing my third book about different dementias because I have Lewy body dementia. The arts play such an important role. We know the role of music, and now we're beginning to know the role of storytelling, which you've taken it one step further. Put them on the stage and showcase us. Showcase, and I will be forever grateful, and we all will, the working group and those of us who have Alzheimer's, that none of you is beyond us. There is nothing we can't achieve, and from the bottom of my heart, I thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay. You have the small job of following on.
I have a bit of a long-winded question for you, and it relates to a few things that Terry Pratchett has said in his life, and also things that Kevin has said in his life. So I'll try and get to the point. But there was a documentary that Terry Pratchett and his assistant made a few years ago called Living with Alzheimer's. And in it, there's a scene where himself and Rob are in a car and they're driving to a book signing event. And Terry Pratchett says something like, I think the quote is like, he's so happy to say, today we're doing something that has absolutely nothing to do with Alzheimer's. And that stood out to me. Now, Kevin has always said through meetings and stuff that we've had with him where, you know, a meeting with Lewy Body Ireland, which is the charity that we have met each other through, let's say a meeting has come up the week before Christmas. Some of us have definitely fallen into the shoes of like, oh God, it's Christmas. And Kevin has taught us Lewy Body doesn't take holidays. Lewy Body doesn't care whether it's Christmas or not. Lewy Body's still going to be here, or Alzheimer's, or whatever kind of dementia it is. So I suppose there are two kind of separate dichotomies. But being that this play was written about Alzheimer, or written about dementia, and was starring someone who had dementia. Every single day it was probably dementia, constant dementia. And going back to Terry Pratchett's quote where he says, today we're doing something that has nothing to do with this. I'm wondering, did you ever feel that cloud of dementia over you? And if so, what did you do to just say, today we're not dealing with dementia, we are sort of celebrating this piece of art somehow different? Like, how did you kind of sort of take a break from maybe the hardships that were dementia, but also keep in mind sort of the lesson that Kevin has taught, to respect the fact that you can't just get sick of it, close the book and go home. You know, it's still in the world. So yeah, I hope that makes sense.
I mean, to be honest, that's probably the biggest challenge of the whole piece. And you know, you can't really evade that cloud. You can't evade the gravity of it. And you know, I'll be honest, coming off stage with him, sometimes you might be in a quite. It's a very emotional play, and then you know you're met with your colleague, and you realise that he'll be going home in the same state, and that Bryan won't actually remember the performance he just did, possibly by the time he leaves the building. So you know, my policy is sort of, you know, you just have to sit with that reality and not try and erase it. But what I would say is, the team were very good at trying to structure that. At least I and other members, you know, we had our personal assistant for Bryan. It meant that I was responsible for Bryan as soon as he was on stage. But when we were off stage, there was a team of stage managers and other people that would deliberately make sure that I would know that he's looked after, and I would be able to, you know, go to my own dressing room and chat to the other actor and have a break. And our hours were pretty forgiving. We did much in the theatre. We do tech days that are usually very long, from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Our tech days were just 10 to 6. And that was great, and should be done more.
Did most
And
of the,
Barry was available, so it was through a team of people supporting each other, I'd say, and being able to talk to each other about how things went. Because Bryan would have a shorter day, and we would do check-ins most days about how we're all doing.
And I
so
would
it's about
also
where-
say is like we're all a group of dedicated, devoted, passionate, and very happy artists who were making a piece of art. And Bryan, regardless of his dementia, is a dedicated, devoted, extremely talented artist. And in the moment, he had just as much to offer as he ever would have. So in the moment, as we were rehearsing a scene or doing a scene, you had Bryan Murray, you know, the genius of Bryan finding something. The tragedy is that in 10 minutes' time, he won't remember it. But we got good at kind of clocking it, recording it, knowing it was the right, you know, move or moment, and then doing everything to try and facilitate it happening again. So in one way we were under the cloud, and then in another way we never were, because as an actor, like what directors say all the time is keep it fresh, keep it new. Well, for Bryan, it was brand new. Every time
we never
he
had to
opened
worry
his
about
mouth.
that any night.
You know what I mean? So you were also mining, and then because of the challenges, we all worked in different ways and probably worked at 110%. So it probably got a lot better out of us, if that makes sense. Do you know? Sometimes, you know, a challenge, what's to say, mother of all invention? Yeah. So.
It's very inspiring. Any other questions, please?
I would just love to know how you handle the practicalities of blocking both during the rehearsal stage and actually what happened on the night.
We basically learned we couldn't really do blocking. We learned that I could do blocking. And we learned that chairs are very useful. So we tried to make it not look like we were always trying to put Bryan in a chair and me standing, but Bryan was never responsible to move the set. We learned visual cues. Bryan responded to really well. So if I offered a chair or I literally offered my arm, Bryan would respond very well to guiding, but we also wanted to be very careful that it didn't look like there was a young man leading around an old man who doesn't know where he's going. We wanted to respect his own dignity and his own movement, and we experimented. So, you know, we might have done something that looked too patronizing, you know, and the director would be like, yeah, that doesn't look organic, that looks like you're helping him. And we wanted to paint him in the strongest light. So, but we found a language that was kind of as subtle as possible. And then sometimes the actual set would mean Bryan just had to move. And
So
which
you
would be done very
set.
safely, you know. So we would experiment, and it was a lot of experimenting. So you just had to, so I always knew where everything had to be. And Bryan didn't, but Bryan was always like, any movement that I was making was dictated by where he'd be safest or where it'd be easy, and very often we'd say like, oh yeah, Bryan goes to the bench now because he just loves going to the bench, so we're not going to stop that. So again, the whole design or everything would move around something that was consistent for him. So we'd just be consistent. It just took a lot of time, to be really honest.
And we knew that before we went in. So even when I was writing the play is written in such a way that the younger James, being played by Matthew, leads every shift and every change. You know, but what we wanted to achieve was that there were some people in the audience who never knew that Bryan had Alzheimer's. And if you didn't know, you wouldn't know. Do you know? So it's like that he didn't do an awful lot of moving. The set moved around him, Matthew moved around him, or else there was lovely moments kind of choreographed where Matthew, and there was a real connection, like he really trusted you.
Yeah, well, even like,
you know.
Bryan never, there was one day he actually knew my name, and I like nearly burst into tears. Oh my God, she just went, "What, Matthew, how are you?" And I was like, "What?" And it was amazing. But I always actually felt Bryan always knew that I was his fellow actor. And that's when you were talking about, like, what's his passion? His passion's acting. He's been an actor. He knows what it is to have a colleague of an actor for like his whole life and career. So the relationship was always clear. So that felt like there was, and that was really privileged for me, is there was a shorthand with someone that's you know, nearly 2 generations more than me in the industry, but we basically have these events in common, and we were able to talk about the text and, you know, the routine of it the same. So that shorthand ended up being much easier than expected, because his ability to kind of just work and trust a fellow actor and kind of do weird stuff on stage while people are watching, that's no problem to him. That's what we do all the time as actors. You kind of get over it.
Amazing. I really respect how much dignity you built into the whole process. Like, it's not like it was, as you say, looking after the guy because he's frail. It was
Exactly.
It was like, this is something that we need to build in because he's a human being, like all of us. Love it. We're rapidly running out of time, but we have time for one more question if there is one. Oh, thank you.
So you said this is like the first play of this kind, and about all the accommodations that you made. Do you think that other theatres would be willing to implement these kind of changes to make theatre more dementia friendly and inclusive in general, or have you been in talks with anyone to offer advice, or would you be willing to?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think that what we've created, without realising it or without that being the initial impetus or ambition, we've created a blueprint for how you do it. And certainly that play could be done by another actor with Alzheimer's, or the template of it could be developed. I suppose it's just like we were saying this, we're all really busy artists, and that there's not a lot of finance around culture, particularly at the moment. So there hasn't been a debrief where we've all written all of this down. So I'm just flagging to anybody and everybody, I think that should be done. You know, time should be taken to kind of, we've got a brilliant film of it. All of us who are involved in it, it's still very fresh in our heads, but we're all doing a suite of other projects. I think it's actually a really important final step that has not been taken, is recording that and setting it out so that it could be done by other actors and theatres around the world.
I couldn't agree more. I think we should be in contact.
Great. Tick.
Is that where you can?
No, it's really important. No, we were both
we talk
having
about
this
like
conversation.
ideally Deirdre's script would have like we talked about this loads after the show at the bar, you know, of an info pack for how, because there really are just things being like, oh, you're going to need 2 stage managers, you're going to need an offstage actor doing this, you're going to need this amount of time in your rehearsal. These are all things we should ideally put together, but just you do a lot of things for free in the arts, and at a certain stage you can't always do them. But it's absolutely something we need to do for the work, and for your work to live on in another city, maybe in another language, who knows? It could work.
You solved so many problems through the process of needing to.
Yeah.
And so if somebody else can start at the point that you've finished off, that's a whole lot of problems they don't have to solve. They'll have their own problems, but that's amazing work.
And just even to finish, like the reason for it, Kevin, is we don't have to lose that talent.
Yeah.
Well, why would we lose that talent and that genius when it's something that's so important to all of us? So if you can find a way to hold that, well, that's magic.
Exactly. I agree. Okay. Thank you so much. Please.
Thank
keep
you.
going.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant work.
Great, lovely. Goodbye, I guess. Thank you.